This is a really important rule that I follow on almost every client parcel that I go to. And it's not necessarily a deer bedding rule, but it has to do with deer bedding and your property's ability to hold deer on it in the first place. It has to do with how you fill in the gaps, how you manage your entire habitat to actually hold deer. And what's really cool about this is this rule applies to deer. You know, you put deer on the bullseye right there. You just put deer right here in the middle of a target, and this is what you aim at. It encompasses almost all wildlife species. It encompasses the indicator species of grouse, if you can have them in your area, but grouse, pheasant, same with pheasant, rabbits, and turkey nesting and poult, turkey poult. So if you have and you hit all of those, then you'll have good whitetail habitat and vice versa. Whitetail habitat's a little bit more complex because you have to worry about access, depth of cover, having food for deer when they need it the most during the hunting season so you can actually hold them, protect them, advance them to the next age class, have a good hunt. There's timing. Usually the pheasants aren't going miles away or a mile or two away during one time of the year, and then they come over here for another time of the year. Usually they're staying pretty local. Turkey's the same. Now they might winter somewhere, but outside of that, typically they're in pretty much the same location in June, July, rabbits, that they are during the fall, winter. The 40-50 yard rule, 40 to 50 yard rule. And what I mean by that is in that 40 to 50 yard rule, there should be something going on in your property every 40 to 50 yards. Now, if you have 1,000 acres, maybe you stretch that to 100, 120 yards because you have so much work to do. Having a larger parcel is sometimes more of a curse than a blessing. We go to a lot of parcels where we'll go to a 120 acre parcel, 160 acre parcel. We'll start talking about the food plot acreage they need for their area. In a big woods area, it might be 12, 15 acres. In an ag area, maybe they can get away with 5 because there's more of a complementary food source availability in the area. So that means that deer aren't only hitting their food, but in your big wilderness or woods area, they're going to hit your food more, a much higher percentage of those 5 feedings in a 24-hour period because there's nothing else. And you have the highest quality food, so you need more. And there's that balance you have to address in those locations. But bottom line is there should be something going on every 40, 50 yards on an average parcel. And that, if you think about that, you know, for holding cover on your property, big woods. If you're making cuttings every 40, 50 yards in your property and you have 30, 40 yards in between, that's going to be great for holding deer on your property for that location. Now in your bedding areas, it might be 3 or 4 acres and it's just one big location. You're trying to hold deer next to a big food source in the form of does and fawns. That's a little bit different. So when I talk about that 40, 50 yard rule, what does that really mean? And it's something you can apply directly to your property. Kind of relates to public land. I like to relate it back to public land because if you know public land, you know private. If you know private, you know public. You can't know one without the other. You have to know both. So when you have public land and there's nothing going on for hundreds of yards at a time, meaning it's all the same habitat, it's a monoculture, then your potential for wildlife, doesn't matter if it's rabbits, pheasants, grouse, turkeys, let alone whitetails, is very limited. Very, very limited because you don't have that 40, 50 yard rule. When you look at an aerial photo, you want to see those different colors and shapes on that aerial photo because that indicates diversity, which is what we're truly talking about. So I want to talk about fields. When you have a field, people say, I want 10 acres, I want to convert. Now, we're not going to talk about where a food plot should be located because I don't know where your access is, where the woods are, where the deer are coming through, where you can hunt, where it's funneling deer onto your woods. But you have a 10 acre field to convert. You want to surround that field. We'll surround it with switchgrass typically. So you can't see in, deer can't see out. That starts to establish an area where you can actually hold wildlife because if you can look straight across it, like open hardwoods, obviously there's not going to be much wildlife. And then you start thinking 40, 50 yards apart. Well, let's make a pocket of switch, pocket of switch, pocket of switch. Let's start doing that throughout the property, throughout that 10 acres, you start to see the point. Now let's see in between there. You know, all those areas in between, you can just let go to native regeneration. Maybe a briars, trees, shrubs come in. That's not that bad. But let's say you put some diversity pockets in there. Like we do with big rock trees, we actually hybrid willow, hybrid poplar, silky willow, red osier dogwood, fence them so the deer don't eat it. Now you're starting to get real diversity. And then everything else in between, let it go back to early successional growth. Those diversity pockets might only be 30 feet in diameter. Every 40, 50 yards, you're making a pocket of switchgrass that might only be a quarter acre, an eighth of an acre, a tenth of an acre. The point is you're giving them structure within that field. And because it's surrounded, the deer on the inside of that 10 acres feel comfortable because they can't see it out, you can't see in. So they feel comfortable, they feel hidden. And then because you have that diversity, you have food for them, and you have diversity on the inside. And that's why we talk about those monocultures, where a machine comes in, pheasant organization, turkey organization, CRP, government administrators. People even say, well, you get to choose what mix you have. You get to have a different mix in there. You can plant a different mix. You can choose a mix. You can have input on that. Yeah, it's great. It's still a mix. So if you take that mix and you take that tractor and you plant back and forth with whatever mix it is, you don't have diversity every 40, 50 yards. You have the same monoculture from side to side, front to back, top to bottom. And that's where you have poor habitat. Not following the rule, not following the 40 to 50 yard rule. Really a lot harder to plant in that other circumstance. Take that same 10 acre field that was a CRP piece of garbage that didn't attract anything and it's laying down all winter long. Because if you have great wildlife in there in June, July, August, who cares? Don't pat yourself on the back. Because when it all lays down and all those creatures die and you can't have a sustainable wildlife population, whether it's pheasant, quail, rabbits, deer, whatever it might be, because it all lays down in October, November, December, January, February, March, then you're not doing any good. That's why people plant pheasant a lot of times every year in locations, because they can't have a sustainable population because they don't have the habitat for it, because they do something like this that was from what XYZ organization that they planted because it's the latest and greatest blend for pheasant. It's monoculture. Take that monoculture though. Let's go in reverse. Take that monoculture. Create pockets of switch because that's actually cover. Create pockets of shrubs, trees, tree plantings, maybe true conifers. Now, plant that screening all the way around in the form of switch. That's the easiest. Maybe use conifers and portion of it, whatever, because you need, there's hills and you need that height. Maybe you plant rows of silky willows. It's a hybrid willow. We have some out here that are already approaching about 8 feet tall in third growing season. So it's doing really well. And so this year we expect those to start getting closer to that 10 foot, and in 5 years they're 12 by 12. And they're very thick. There's some actually right up there by the pole building. They're still holding their leaves, and it's January 6th today. So it's pretty good cover, especially if you have a couple rows deep, maybe 3 rows. It really gets thick. But you see, you're still following the 40, 50 yard rule then. You still have that diversity. It's still screened from the outside. Take some woods. Same thing. You have your woods. You wonder, what do I do with this 10 acre area that I want to actually hold deer in? It's all woods. 40, 50 yard rule. Think about, you go into that woods and make a quarter acre cutting here, quarter acre cutting here, half acre, quarter acre, third of an acre, quarter acre, quarter. And depending on your habitat, if it's all pole timber, maple, that's all 5 to 7 inches in diameter, because it's all cut at the same time, we go in there and cut down. You probably hinge cut in that case. We don't see a lot of that, but that's why we say hinge cutting. We hinge cut 15, 20% of the time, or recommend it 15, 20% of the time. Usually more like 15, 10%, I would say. We had hinge cut pockets, and then you leave all that open area around, every 40 yards. And so there's a lot of area for deer to move in between. You're not bunching them up and putting them in too thick of an area. You don't have to worry about them going through the hinge cuts or around them. There's plenty of space around, but then you create the sunlight come into the ground, you get browse, and you're diversifying the woods. Maybe you have aspen. So you make quarter acre, half acre clear cuts, so you get full regeneration. You make sure sun can get into those areas, and you get that lateral root explosion. You don't hinge cut aspen, you completely cut it. Maybe you have mature timber, big, giant, soft maples, for example, huge canopy trees. Well, go every 40, 50 yards and cut down 2 or 3 of them. You make giant holes and then go 40, 50 yards, do it again. You start to hold deer on the inside. Go around that 10 acres. Cut timber around so deer can't see out, you can't see in. You start to get the picture. It's a 40, 50 yard rule. Maybe if you're cutting down big timber and you're completely cutting that, you're not hinge cutting a 18-inch diameter tree or a 10-inch diameter tree, you're putting a few on the ground, you just put some really good tops on the ground. Maybe you take the logs out for firewood. But you put some really good tops on the ground so that now you can go in and you can stab white pine, white spruce seedlings that are completely shade tolerant, both of those, and native to most of the north portions of the country, north third. And you just find another species wherever you live. So it's the same thing. I'm not going to list all the species for every state or varieties, but bottom line is you can stab those in those tops. So you have those tops laying there. Yeah, tops laying there on the ground, out. Well, you just start to stab those little conifers in there, and you might have a top. Well, don't get hung up on it. Have to have 5-foot spacing or 6 or whatever. Just stab them in there. And now those are protected by those hardwood tops. Those hardwood tops are not growing because they're disconnected. They're not hinge cut. Now you can diversify the woods with conifers. So when you fly over in 10 years and there's snow on the ground, you look down and what do you see every 40, 50 yards? Conifer tops. You see that dark conifer tops. You don't care if they're 6 feet tall at the time or 12 feet tall or 4 feet tall. They're adding diversity. You can't see through them, and it's a diversity of bedding. There's 4 different bedding components. Always think of this. It's something I wrote an article about a long time ago. These are the 4 that I recognize and that I talk about a lot. A lot of these concepts you can look in my 2012 Whitetails by Design book, and that was my first book that I wrote. I also have a How to Design Your Small Parcel web class. It's the same kind of stuff. But bottom line is, you have those conifers. That's one type of bedding. Briars, grasses, weeds, that's another type. Shrubs, that's a third type. And then hardwood regeneration is the 4th type. Those are the 4 bedding components. When you see all 4 of those happen in one spot, you got a beautiful spot with lots of wildlife, not just whitetails. When you see 3, that's pretty good too, because most places don't even have 3. And when you see 1, like this field up there that was planted all the same, that's bad. It's bad for wildlife, it's bad for whitetails. But the same 40, 50 yard rule. And then what do? The mix of both, when you have fields and woods, it's awesome. Because you have areas you can fill in with this habitat, woods you're cutting like this. When you put it all together, you have a ton of diversity. And that's where you're going to have whitetails and wildlife. Always remember the lowest value timber is typically the highest wildlife value. The highest value timber is typically the lowest wildlife value. And bottom line is you protect it all. What do you start out with first? I remember a 5-acre woods that we hunted when we were growing up in the end of the 80s and all 90s. There's 10-acre woods behind it, surrounded by all ag. We would push deer from the 5-acre woods that was in the corner of 160 acres through a 1/4 mile, 10-acre strip of woods. So the woods was a 1/2 mile from the road or the farm, all open field. And then there's the 5-acre woods, and there's a 1/4 mile, 10-acre strip. And the other side, there's another 1/4 mile strip that went across open ag, and then a 1/2 mile open ag on the other side of that. We could push deer out of that 5 acres, set up someone to bow hunt on the back side of the 10 in that 1/4 mile before the road on a ditch, and we would walk halfway to the 5-acre woods, and deer were already on the back side of the 10 acres running along the ditch. Someone already got a shot at him with a bow, usually missed, and the deer were across the road and across the 1/2 mile strip of open ag on the other side of the section. So they're halfway through the other section, and we hadn't gotten halfway to the woods. Why? Because it wasn't protected from the outside. There's no switchgrass surrounding it. There's no hinge cuts. There's no conifers. Deer could see out. We could see in. You're not going to hold very many deer that way. And that's what gives you true diversity. Protect it from the outside. Follow the 40 to 50 yard rule. And again, that might be 80 to 100 yards if you have a big parcel. Might be 20 to 30 yards if you're in a limited cover area in northern Ohio where you really have to compartmentalize. That comes into that balance. It might be acceptable to do something every 200 yards on a 1,000-acre parcel in a wilderness up north area because you don't want to compartmentalize deer up there because deer expect to see more than 5-10 yards in any direction. They want to see 30-40 yards because of predators. It's a little bit different balance. But northern Ohio area I use all the time, that region, because it's flat and there's no trees. And there you might have a buck that can only see from here 5 feet, 10 feet over. He's okay with that because he has his little spot and he doesn't have to worry about predation. And deer are forced into close proximity with each other. Bottom line is, I hope the 40 to 50 yard rule makes a lot of sense. Worked great for holding cover. You might do something different in your specific bedding areas that are 5 acres, 3 acres against a food source. Maybe a knoll 300 yards away where you expect to actually have bucks on. You might do something different. The bottom line is all that area in between where you're just trying to hold more deer and create more wildlife opportunity, follow the 40, 50 yard rule. Doesn't matter if it's an open field. That's why I hope it makes sense. When you plant all conifers, it doesn't matter if they're white pine, red pine, jack pine, and a few spruce thrown in, and someone says that's diversity. No, that's just all conifer. When you have a native grass blend, a big blue stem, Indian little blue stem, switchgrass, if it's all in the same mix, in the same field, in the same area, it's a monoculture. Doesn't matter how many different grasses you are, it's a grass monoculture. No different than a conifer monoculture. No different than if you have a grass mix with a bunch of broadleaf pollinators of flowers, cones, milkweed, whatever it is. If it's the same mix spread out over the same 10 acres, it's a monoculture unless you follow the 40 to 50 yard rule. And that's why most of these organizations don't recommend something like that, because they're going in with a machine, planting it and getting out of there. They're selling a mix in a bag, and you're never going to find a great mix in a bag that'll give you the 40 to 50 yard rule, which is why you won't have wildlife, let alone great whitetails, in those areas until you start following the 40, 50 yard rule this off season. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You're our best followers. You followed all the way to the end of the video. Really invite you to check out our website. We have our earthway spreaders for sale. Great Christmas presents. We're booking clients right now, all 5 of us. So by the end of December, it seems early, but by the end of December, our schedule will be booked for 2025. It's hard to believe. I'm already booked for December and most of January, February. We have our web classes, the Rut web class, how to design your whitetail property, and really important, hunting hills and thermals, understanding the wind. Those are great products on our site, all the books. Thank you so much for watching all the videos, buying the seed that you did this year. Really appreciate you.